Walk around the room, just going over.
Okay. Okay. So I'm Helen Warren, and I've been on the CMRB for 2.5 years now. And when I first got on, I wanted to be on the grievance committee because I had heard from some people who had left the church and had gone through the grievance policy process, and they weren't back at church. They still left. So I wanted to find out more about that process and how do we maybe bring people back. Since then, last year, we had the big kerfuffle, and a lot of people were engaged in the process of how do we deal with a grievance with what I call the Holy Trinity. But before we go into that part of the discussion, I want to introduce Cindy Martin, who is with the grievance policy. We have the structure is somebody from CMRB and 2 members at large. Cindy's one of those.
2 church members.
2 church members. And Rob White is another member of at large.
Currently singing.
Yes. So and then there will be somebody from the Board of Human Resources.
That's me.
That you are that. Okay. Because I was, okay. We'll put your name down on that. Because we just had a discussion with Donna that we had dropped the ball on that part of, and that's great. So there's a formal structure of what the grievance policy process lays out. And I refer to that as like the Holy Trinity, where you have a grievance between ministerial people, staff, and members of the congregation members. I wanted to say something other than lay people. And then those relationships can go in many directions. Cindy's going to go over that part of the procedure policy, and then I'm going to weave into that the behavioral covenant and the compact, which I feel if we exercise those practices better in our own life, we have to start with ourselves, our relationships with others, whether that's our family or neighbors. We're going to be building better community by doing that, and maybe we'll alleviate the need for doing grievances within house because we're all getting along so well in the perfect world of Shakespeare.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to say a few words about the process or the processes to avoid. Yeah, so Helen's going to focus more on covenant. And so each June, grievance committee is chosen and voted on. And so that's what we're a part of. There is a roadmap to trying to solve issues, and those issues can be a variety, like Helen had mentioned. If you have concerns about a church board, committee, or program, if you have concerns with your relationship with the church, if you have a concern involving a clergy person or a member of the church staff or one of the officers, if you have an issue with another church member. And so all of there, like I said, there is a roadmap. I'm not sure how available the roadmap is. Do you know where is it on our website? Okay, I got it in an email. So Okay. So you can read that, and we have access to it easily too. But so there are steps you can take before you even file a grievance. So hopefully we never have a grievance, where there's a structure to follow to solve your problems, hopefully. And then there is a grievance procedure that we have a roadmap to as well. And just a little side note, soon after we were mentioned as the grievance committee, I had somebody come up to me and they were talking about an issue that they had with somebody. And talked a long time. I asked questions. And then the next day I heard from them and said, you know what? I think I'm not ready to file a grievance. I'm going to try something else. And so just listening to that person and asking questions and being, the devil's advocate or whatever, helped steer them towards another direction. And so hopefully that is getting better situation from that. So anyway, any questions about that? I just kind of wanted to mention who we are, where we came from, what we do. Hopefully nothing. But just know that there is a roadmap. If you do have any issues, we can help tell you what that is as well. So.
Can you reiterate what CMRB stands for those of us who can't remember?
You're on that.
Church Ministry Review Board.
Congregation Ministry Review.
Congregation Ministry Review Board. Thank you. And that, of course, this isn't going to alleviate grievances. Is that on? Or is that on? Okay. Some of my first growing with this was realizing I had grievances with myself. And I had moved to a new place from here where everything in Gainesville was so compact. You could go anywhere and you'd run into friends. And I'd moved to a new place out to Arizona. And other than it being hotter than anything else I'd ever experienced, I just missed hearing my name. Somebody call me, Helen, why don't you come do this? Or, catch the ball, or just that loneliness that I just never could imagine being after living in Gainesville where everybody was connected. And I was starting to make friends. And then I would find, but that person does this or that person does that. I was younger. I was 30, and we're pretty picky about who we hang out with. But then I realized that if I was going to hold up friendship building with people that I had a grievance with, I needed to look at myself a little bit better. And I think you all can reflect on times when you've let yourself down. How many times have you done something and it's just like kicking yourself in the butt because you could have done it better. You didn't do it the way that you would like to have done it. And it was really a point of self-growth where I realized if I'm going to let myself off the hook, I can't quit seeing me. And I had to learn to love myself and let those things go. And also, I grew up in a family of 6 kids and mom and dad who weren't great communicators. And if we had conflict and a fight with one another, our instructions were just leave the room. Don't go away mad, just go away. And that didn't help with a lot of learning how to get along with each other. To this day, we aren't very close. And you learn to value your true friends that way. So getting back to what we're doing now with a covenant, how many have you been able to read the behavioral covenant that came out of the Pathfinders group? I've got copies of that to share, and I had originally thought that we would break out into small discussion groups, forgetting that in the seminar format, it's difficult for people who are watching on Zoom what happens when we break out. So if you can share this around, this is the behavioral covenant, and I'd like to just take a moment. I think the best thing to do is, like when we do the compact, is just to read this aloud. This came out crooked of the printer, but it's still able to be read. I've got one. Okay, so if you've got that, let's start with the beginning, to follow even imperfectly. And I love the way it follows with the compact and then the behavioral covenant. And I had first introduced this topic when I was writing to the seminar committee to say what I'd be talking about, was that I wanted to look at the marriage between our compact and the behavioral covenant, because there's just so much of an overlap, and also finding that the behavioral covenant is so much like the 10 Commandments, or the many of the philosophies that the Buddha or Muhammad or the Native Americans. Basically, this reflects, I think, what the humanist would also say. What about our relationships with each other? So if we would read these together, starting with the first one, I love the heading of this of, to follow even imperfectly the way of Jesus and personal involvement with each other by promising to treat each other with love, kindness, and compassion, be supportive, welcoming, and inclusive. Listen to the words, ideas, and feedback of others attentively and with a curious mind. Speak only from our own experience, using I statements whenever possible. Discuss, debate, and disagree in an open and respectful manner. Express our feelings honestly and respond to one another with patience and a desire to understand, recognizing that others may be experiencing difficulties that are unknown to anyone else. When conflict happens, remember to pause if triggered. Assume the best intentions of each other. Invite more information. Respond with respect and refrain from negative judgment. Take personal responsibility for our actions and seek repair and reconciliation when we harm others. So with that as a starting point and an opportunity for reflection, is there any one of these items that hits anybody here in particular? An experience that you've had with yourself, a relationship with another? And certainly it doesn't need to be with another from this church. It could be a neighbor, a co-employee that you work with. Carol. So if you want to hand the mic around, when we can run for that.
As many of you know, I worked for the court and family court. And I was given a course in conflict resolution. And one of the things that strikes me is a little technique, and that is to use large pads and put them up when you're having a discussion. And like Helen said, then you can see you as well as others. And it's more active listening. So you hear, what Eric has to say, and then what Cindy has to say, and you kind of look at that, and it helps you be more objective. And I really benefited from that training on being more of an active listener and not thinking defensively.
Stick-up memo pad would have been great to have had something like that for writing down comments. Over here, Rhonda and as well.
Hi, everybody. I think the part that struck me the most was, well, let's see. It's the one about speaking from your own experience and avoiding you messages. It took me a long time to learn that, how to do it, but it's been important in meetings, especially. Just speak from your own experience or speak to the agenda.
I just wanted to say, I think I remind myself of this a lot, that you never know what somebody's going through. So.
Yeah, and I just wanted to say the same thing, that part about recognizing others may be experiencing difficulties that are unknown to anyone else. It's never just about you. And so that was one of the things that struck me here, is that reminder is very important everywhere.
Anyone else have something to share? How would you see these items of the covenant being applied in other areas of your life? I mean, are you reading any of these and saying, there's somewhere I could use that outside of your home? Like, I had an experience with a neighbor who was upset with another neighbor, and I thought, wow, this is just what we're talking about with the grievance policy. I went and talked to the other neighbor because he works for me on a lot of things, and the neighbor didn't like that I did that. So sometimes you've got to be careful how you think you may be helping the situation. I should have asked her, the solution. What I didn't do, take the step of, was asking the person who had shared her complaint if she was okay with me talking with this other person. I could go on so many different things of this, but I really want this to be an opportunity to hear from you all, because we've all had a chance to look at this before, but we haven't had a chance to really talk about how would we implement it. And there's a second part of this that is the implementation ideas. Maybe that would be what we can go on to next, because the information here is, again, it's a classic thing. The service has ended, now let the worship begin. Did I get that one right? No. Are we up the tree without a paddle? Yeah. It's not the service has ended?
The worship has ended, let the service begin.
Okay. I can't promise I'll get it right.
Upside down. Not your job, Helen.
As long as you all know, I'm left-handed, born in Maine. It's hard mixing up a lot of things. And a twin brother, so communication was a hard thing, because you don't learn to talk English with the grown-ups for a long time because you have another baby to talk baby with. So the implementation ideas, as we look over this, I'm not going to ask us to read them aloud, but looking over this, and there should be a front and back to this, this would be the part where we would talk about following up with. Do you need another one?
If you have them.
I had some bad copies, so see if there's one in there. Yes, there is. This would be how we as a congregation take our next step. There's a lot of cool ideas that were mentioned, and again, a lot of this came out of the group Pathfinder. But to look at congregational life team, and really the big part of understanding our relationship with whatever is up here really is our relationship with what's all around us. And that includes people, our pets, and our neighbors. So looking at some of this, we did one of the items there already, the second one. She's going off to do a good thing. Reading aloud the behavioral covenant. And then discussing it in meetings as far as, are there steps that you see in these implementation ideas that you think would be good for a group activity? We could either do a small group, to follow up on other conversations about how do we walk out into the community. And I think of the song, they'll know that we are Christians by our love. Imagine that sign. But when I am out in the community at like a prayer vigil because there was a shooting or some other thing, and I see the number of people from UCG, when I was first coming here, that was one of the things that just was, these are good people. I want to be a part of a good people group. And so we don't wear signs, but we see each other and we show up. So how are we showing our love in other ways? We've got a really great social justice committee, but when we're somewhere and we hear somebody with a complaint about something, do we just let people complain about things without finding a way to resolve the conflict? Do we just go away? And how do we teach our kids to deal with these things? Because that's, for anybody who has children, you're dealing with this all the time. Anybody have any experiences with their own family with how they've dealt with something like this? Either conflict within the kids? You're smiling. You must. This is supposed to be a discussion group, Jane.
Okay. So I'm an Irish triplet, meaning my brother's not even a year older than I am, and my sister's not even a year younger. And so there was fighting going on, and my dad would tell us to go into a room, and we're going to be siblings our whole life, and work it out. And my sister and I would go in the room, and I would try to lie and say to Jill, some of you know my sister, let's just say we resolve this and let's go back out and play. But Jill had a lot of integrity from birth. And so they would like, my parents would come out and I could just lie to their faces. I could just go, yeah, we figured it out. And they'd look at Jill and they'd say, Jill, and she'd go, yeah, we figured it out. She wouldn't make eye contact and she'd say, Jane, you're grounded for a week for trying to pull one off on us. Go back in there and try to figure it out. You're going to be siblings your whole life. And we were just I mean, we'd be giving each other the silent treatment for a while and we'd just try to figure it out. And then our parents would facilitate. Our parents would facilitate, especially my dad would facilitate, you know, the end, bring closure and then move on, you know. So that was our style in my family. But it was but what I was smiling about is that I was trying to manipulate my parents and they saw right through me. I mean, so again, it was I would get grounded if I pulled that off, you know. And I had a lovely sister who, you know, couldn't lie at all. So my brother and I, you know, it seemed like my sister and I would fight more than my brother and I. My brother was off doing his stuff with friends and stuff and you know, he was pretty easygoing. We get in fights with my sister about like clothes, like she wanted to wear my clothes without my permission and you know, like that sort of thing. We shared a room. And so we tended to get into it a little bit more than my brother and I. Thank you.
Parenting. Yeah.
Yes.
Are they professionally teachers or?
They were Catholic. And I know that people really sometimes have a negative experience with Catholicism, but I didn't have that. And so they really believe don't let the sun go down on your anger but work through it. Work through it. So it was from that that was my parents. It was more of a spiritually based resolution. And I know that's not for lots of Catholics, I know, but that was my family.
Well, if you were having a conflict and couldn't agree, couldn't resolve it, did they then come in and help you with that?
Always. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they did. They had the final say.
But that's a good leadership thing for the parents too, you know, because so many times it's let the kids figure it out, you know, and we would fight as kids, but then we'd get back to the game of whatever was going on. But then what my parents didn't do was give us a way to learn if we weren't getting along. That's really good. My dad was a Catholic and he was one of those children are to be seen and not heard. But he did share some wonderful things as a father. Yeah.
You mentioned you were from Maine, and I'm from Northwest Connecticut. And the culture, you don't, like you mentioned that you didn't talk a lot. And we didn't either. So you didn't have a resolution by discussing things. It was even within the community, with neighbors or whatever. Many times people would just decide that they were just not going to talk to those people anymore, or those neighbors or what.
But that's interesting because I think of the neighborhood of the period of time that you grew up in, and I was in a similar age group. Neighbors did talk about each other, but they, I can't think that we ostracized anybody in the neighborhood. And you're suggesting that that might have. Oh, okay, I'm a little confused there as to who they are. Yeah.
A two-room schoolhouse with 5 classmates, and 3 of them were my cousins. So it was family.
So when we're dealing with a situation these days, when there's a disaster and you've got neighbors showing up after the disaster to clean up, and a common phrase that discussion you'll hear is the neighbors saying, we've been neighbors for 10 years and I didn't even know their name. Now, I think of your period of time when it was more like every neighbor knew every neighbor, especially if you're cousins with each other, but you would still, you still didn't deal with conflict very well. Okay, well, then that kind of throws my whole idea about the old times where, people knew who the drunk was, they knew who to avoid. So maybe the drunk would withdraw, avoid. So one of the things that why this covenant is also really important to me, I'm involved with the community organizations active in disaster. And that is talking about building resilience in a time where we've got a lot of things that are coming up. And it's not just the disaster of a hurricane. Before hurricanes the climate change was getting so bad, about 20 years ago, the concern for a community disaster was what if some foreign country came and knocked our electric power grid down? Do you remember that period of time, like 2000? Y2K. All our computers were going to shut down. And there was chaos as the world was just going to go crazy. But even before then, you would have these discussions about building resilience was really important with knowing who your neighbors are, knowing who would need what type of services if a disaster happened. And I, again, reflect back on these covenants as being the way that if we, in an ideal world, if we practice this, we would be able to, know our neighbors, support each other, talk to the old person who hardly ever gets seen, but would be a better community when that disaster hits. So a lot of the implementation ideas talk about how to grow with that. Eric.
Yeah, I was reading The Atlantic a couple days ago, and there was a really interesting discussion in there. People were talking about climate anxiety. And where the discussion went was, to follow up on what you're saying about community, was that when people are feeling anxious, sometimes I think there's this tendency to kind of like, okay, I'm just going to like do my own thing. And the whole point of this article was that to really effectively reduce climate anxiety, or anxiety in many aspects, is to engage in your community. I think somebody would ask Bill McKibben, if any of you know, he's an environmental writer, and they would say, well, what can I do as an individual to help out? I mean, I hear that. What can I do as an individual? What can an individual do? And he said, well, that's the whole point. It's not about being an individual. It's about acting in community. So it's not what you can do as an individual. It's what you can do part of a community. And that's where the magic is. And that's where, you feel better about yourself at the end of the day, and not like I went out and saved the world all by myself. We went out and we planted some trees. We went out and we cleaned up some trash. We went out and we marched for whatever. We did it together, and that's what this hard article was about. But it really struck me. I'm like, wow, this kind of makes sense. I can reduce my anxiety by interacting with other people, and we're all on the same page doing the same thing. So.
Because that is so much the core of this.
Well, getting back to the conflict resolution
Yes, ma'am.
issue, this bullet point really interests me. It says, we had quite a bit of discussion related to the idea that there's nothing in the compact that encourages members to go directly to a person with whom they have a conflict, rather than complaining and discussing it with others. So and it says Donna feels very strongly about this. I'm asking Donna maybe to comment on this, and then we can launch a discussion about direct person-to-person conflict resolution methods.
Yeah, thank you. So this has been the most interesting part of this entire discussion about conflict resolution, which we've been having now for 7 months, starting with, the seminars in 9 a.m.s in June and July, etc. And the most interesting thing is that quite a few very mature people
have said to me directly, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to go direct to anybody. I'm just not going to do it because it won't work. And I say, okay, then if you want to do that, will you at least promise me not to talk about the mess to everybody else? You know, just would you, or anybody else? But, well, okay, I might do that. And then the next thing to say is, if I went with you to talk to that step, and they tell, sure. But you see, the damage control, it's the parking lot where the damage happens. I'm honest about that's the truth. Because all of a sudden, everybody says something that they're not going to say directly to the person. And I'm trying to think of an example. All right, let's use this. Donna should never have said enshittification in her sermon this morning. She should never, ever have said that. It's just inappropriate. And it's evidence that, you know, she doesn't understand the norms around here. But I would like to talk to you about that. I'm going to tell Susan, and then I'm going to tell, you know, and the thing to say would you please tell Donna that directly? And, oh, I'm not going to do that. She's the minister and she'll be upset. Well, if I find out that you're talking about me about it and I don't know about it first, you want upset? I got upset for you. So, do you see what I'm saying? And if you can't, and that, and you know, people have different levels of conflict tolerance. Get a partner, and if it's about Donna, don't get Donna. Get Helen, who's had, you know, get somebody else to go with you. But the second you start spreading it around, it's like taking a burning twig in a dry forest and dropping it randomly as opposed to coherently. And it damages the community, which is why you have goosebumps about what Eric said. The second we start to think about we as opposed to I can't do that. Okay, well, we can do that. Can we? So that's best I got for I'm not going to do that. and I've heard it. I mean, I've had quite a few points.
I want to just say from past experience that I can back Donna up 100%. We, in my past church, we had procedure and process for any kinds of grievances and spoke often about not having those parking lot conversations. And folks were just unwilling to do this. So the back of this paper that tells that we have some skill building and procedures for working things out. It's so important, and keep reminding and reminding. And if someone comes to you and tries to talk about someone else, as Donna said, point them in the wrong direction, because in the the time that we were members in our past church, we saw 6 pastors and 6 long interims. And that's what happens when folks are speaking behind the lines, spreading evil. Yeah.
If you don't, just to keep if you're not, and you're not going to stop talking about it, then somebody in the parking lot, it would be great if you said, please, please don't talk to me about this until you've talked with Don. So that's the point.
So, am I on? So I believe that when people don't want to speak directly to another person, it's because they anticipate that there would not be a constructive or healthy outcome based on past experiences. So I think that, in a culture of niceness or maintaining niceness, it gets in the way of speaking in a forthright manner with authenticity sometimes. And that's where we need to get to. For instance, in the example that Donna just gave, if somebody said, I didn't like that word Donna used from the pulpit, and several other people who were in the conversation listening invalidated or were dismissive of that concern, if they said, oh, it wasn't so bad. Oh, you're just so oversensitive. Oh, there was nothing wrong. I didn't hear anything wrong with what was said. Then it shuts down the conversation. Similarly, when there is a dispute, if you have a doctrine of the squeaky wheel gets the grease, that doesn't resolve it. By squeaky wheel, I mean the one on whichever side of the argument or conversation, if they're the one sending the most text messages at 11 p.m., or if they're the one displaying a full-blown temper tantrum here on the campus, then there's a tendency to let's just make them happy and shut it down. They're obviously right, or they wouldn't be so upset. They wouldn't be acting this way. So whoever brought up the opposite point of view, they're sitting there calm, so their side of it isn't as important, can't be valid. It's this person who's really screaming and, letting it all hang out. Well, we need to calm them down. Let's bring them up to the podium, let them read a poem. There you have it.
What Shelby said is exactly right. If you say, tell me more, when the person says, shouldn't have said that word from the pulpit, tell me more. Da, 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 da. I'm interested. I'm interested in what you have to say. Probably, and you may even get asked, well, what did you think? You don't need to say what you think until you've heard what the person is upset about. You just don't need to. You don't need to weigh in. It's not it's not a referendum. The person's actually, every complaint is a bid for intimacy, right? Yeah. Every complaint. So tell me more. And it's likely that that person will say, well, boy, I don't even know what you think. Tell me. And then you might have a shot at a conversation without somebody being right and somebody being wrong. And you don't have to shut a complaint down. You can allow the complaint to breathe. It may have really good points to it. So there are ways to have these conversations.
And I think what I've heard from several of those comments and what we said, I think you mentioned it earlier, is you don't know what they've been experiencing, and you don't know if that was a trigger of some kind. So again, it's an opportunity for intimacy to find out what's behind that for them.
Yeah, well, I wanted to thank Donna for the first time I think I went to a seminar with Donna. She said, I love complaints. I can handle criticism. Bring it on. And I trust her. And we've had discussions and she means it. And that makes me feel safe because she really means it. I was on the Covenant, this congressional life team, Wendy, myself, Shelby, and maybe someone else in here. There were 10 or 11 of us who created the Covenant. And we talked about the whole direct thing. And we said, we're not ready yet. And it had to do with people not feeling safe when other people came to them directly, the discomfort. And then when Donna came in May, we were just wrapping it up. And Donna and I had a conversation. I mean, we were just wrapping it up. And we had talked about the whole direct thing. And then 11 of us or 10 of us said, we couldn't come to a consensus about that. And then finally, I've been here 15 years now, and I went to the all board kickoff. And I'll never forget the role playing that Vince, Sandy, and Andy did about triangulation. I was like, amen, amen. And people need to know how to comfortably handle triangulation, or they'll just kind of shut down. So it's, I mean, they did it fabulously, kind of like kindly, like, hey, I'm getting a little uncomfortable talking about that, or have you talked to them directly about that? Oh no. And it was brief, and it was sophisticated, and it was like lovely. Like, this is how we roll here, you know? So I appreciate that. And that I've thought about that so many times. But everybody has to be on board with that, you know? Absolutely.
So much of the culture that we seek to create is this openness, this idea for for good, strong, positive communication. One of the ways in which we used to do this, one of the amazing things about the United Church of Gainesville is with 600 members, over 300 are involved in leadership in this congregation. That statistic alone is phenomenal and puts us off the chart of most mainline Protestant denominations. The two areas where we had the most opportunity to impact culture were in the all board kickoff, which is where every board person serving on every board member comes together. It's often a jubilant, joyful affair, but it's also the opportunity for the moderator to cast their vision for the year and for the leadership to offer leadership training. We would do goal setting. We would look at business statements so that everyone was on target with what we were seeking to do as a church, based in love and worship and service, but also in how we interact and act with each other. The other significant piece that we would do was our leadership training, where we would invite all of the committee chairs for all of church council to come together. We would go through the entire notebook of the church council, right? Which includes everything from how we do a budget to, how to run a good meeting, how to have a spiritual focus. But it included the roadmap. It included the grievance policies. It included all of our policies and procedures. So we began by educating our leaders in how we communicate and what the policies and procedures are of the church. And then those filtered down into the members of the boards and committees, which means on an annual basis, almost half of the congregation had a touch point for positive communication. It's where you heard no secrets, no subterfuge. Anyone? No surprises, but that's exactly right. And that, which was just a stalwart in how we used to communicate. And the other was no triangulation. So the roadmap, and there's another policy in there of how to deal with negative behaviors from a church member. The roadmap is the second step, right? When you are having these triangulation moments, the parking lot discussions or the recreational gritching is what we used to call it. When those are not being positively or effectively addressed, that's when the roadmap comes in. And the roadmap is the one that invites in that third party to the conversation so that you can hopefully come to a place of not even agreement, but a place of peace where you feel heard, the other person feels heard, and you've had opportunity to voice your concerns. If people are unwilling, and Shelby, I agree, sometimes people are not willing to enter into those conversations, that's where the grievance comes in. It's a very formal process. It is tedious and difficult, and it should be, because I think what has happened in the last few years is people have been using the grievance policy to file complaints against ministerial staff, which perhaps could have or should have been addressed in other places in a more positive way. Because once a minister has a grievance filed against them, that goes on their permanent record, and they have to name that for every future job that they seek, right? The few grievance policies or grievance procedures that we had while I was still on staff here, I often resulted because people were dissatisfied with the way in which their arguments were not being affirmed. And sometimes people just are those squeaky wheels. People just have a bone to pick and they're going to pick it. And that was problematic with our past clergy. So these policies are clean and clear, and I appreciate them. I would love it. I don't think we need to address behavioral covenants because the implication to me is that there's this widespread negative work that's happening in the United Church of Gainesville, and I am not seeing that. I understand that it's been a significant issue, but my preference would be to address it with leadership, in those two different areas, and keep it as part of the constant education that we do for leadership training for staff.
Can somebody give me an example, maybe using Donna's example of enshittification? What is triangulation and how does it work?
Well, you want to talk about that? Let me just comment on this very important thing Andy has said. There was a Camelot period here when things were done very well. Leadership really functioned at a very high level. 300 lay leaders were trained, read the book, really loved their structure. They got goodies out of being part of the structure. They were 4 pastors who made that happen. So it was like a hugely healthy, proactive preparation for knowing what the hell I'm doing here. Who am I? Where do I belong? What do the other people think? So you really had a good thing. There might be a reason that in the Camelot period having dissolved over time, that other pastors were not able to create that foundational health. I call it the prehab health, doing stuff right before you get into a problem. And so if that didn't happen, let's say consistently for 10 full years, you're a little downhill. And that's not anybody's fault. And that's not a blame question. That's a reality. Maybe instead of quitting smoking, you smoked another, or whatever you did to yourself, you didn't have the leadership that was really making things operate smoothly. And I think that's a little bit where we are. I mean, speaking as the interim, that we're a little downhill on the uphill, the preventive social norms and rewards for social norms. And it would be great to get back up there. But before we self-flagellate or whatever, or, don't just live in the present, let's just say we need some more skills and we need to ask for leadership to help us do more proactive prehab healthcare about the system. So this year, the all board retreat was a joke. I mean, people didn't know about it. We didn't know what it was supposed to do. We were, Talia, our institutional memory, wasn't here. I was thinking, what is this? So people kind of talked at each other, and I ended up doing all the talking, which I'm doing again. So I'm going to stop. The triangulation. Make us understand.
I've been talking, as I spoke with some people recently, we were thinking about this situation, and I've had this strong image in my head about the church being like a family where it starts with the parents have the kids, and the parents set a very clear direction. So the whole family goes in that direction. Everything is working well until a certain point, and then the parents die. And then in every family, the kids fight because the rules that were upheld before are changing, and everybody has to figure out, what do we do now? But in that way, it's like, that's when you realize the family is the family, it's not the parents. And we have to agree, and we have to find this new way. But it's part of life. And it's part of life that we have to figure out how to have a conversation with each other and not hit each other in the head, because now we both need the money. It's not the parents giving us the money. is we both need it, and we both are standing in different situations. And when this conflict started to happen with the past minister, and I was in HRB, we realized there was something missing. There were processes, procedures that were not specified. There was no way we had no communication with the other boards. There was an organizational structure that was not in place. And it's something we have to create. And it's not something that we are missing because we're bad. It's something that we are missing because the church has a history where it was small and where boards, just people hung with each other all day long, or, and they had conversations. So in my mind, there's a lot of work to be done from many different perspectives. And speaking about what you said about the covenant, I do have a personal feeling that maybe we're focusing too much in the conflict that happened in the past few years. I mean, this behavioral covenant should be for all of us to follow with our families and in the church, in everywhere. We don't really even would have to focus on that conflict, but it's something. I came here because I want to know how to be a better person, both in church and with my family.
Thank you. Did we go to definitions of prior relation yet? Andy, go for it.
I have a problem with flow. And instead of addressing flow, I talked to Shelby about my problem with flow. And then my problem with flow continues. And Shelby, I try to get Shelby to join my team or but basically that's triangulation.
When I first left my house and I lived with a roommate, my roommate was a music student, and she was waking up at 5 a.m., putting her headset on and starting to practice in her little piano. So she was silent, but I could hear everything. And I couldn't sleep well. I was desperate, and I would go out and talk to my friends and say, this is crazy. She's doing this and she's doing, well, maybe you can do that. And then at some point I had spoken with enough people, and one of my friends say, have you actually spoken with her? I was like, I think that was a lot of triangulation.
Why is it we hesitate to take a question to the person that's the center of the question? It's the period underneath the circle.
Because we don't think it's going to be well received. They will be uncomfortable with it because they are not accustomed to forthright communication.
But there's also something to say about picking people and advice or maybe often.
Yeah. And that's one of the follow-ups that I would hope to come out of this conversation is, is there an interest in having like a small group where we talk about practicing, if we feel like we have a difficult time approaching somebody, to be honest, to speak from the heart. It was something I read on a music album back in my 30s. Everything happened in my 30s. Speak from the heart, and then you hope that they can hear from the heart. But if we can learn to express our sadness or worry from that point, and we say it with love at least, because so there's the thing is, don't go screaming, yelling your anger. You have to get control of yourself enough to be able to speak with full love to the person you're having conflict with. Jane.
Yeah, as part of the CLT team, we had a seminar, and one of the persons who mentioned it said, "Hey, are still learning," and he talked about his younger self who wasn't quite as emotionally mature. It was just a beautiful comment, about creating a community where you don't have to be perfect with this stuff. My concern about small group is that there's so many other small groups. I mean, look at the seminar size. I mean, we usually have 3 or 4 times the people.
They're singing in the choir.
Correct. So it has to do with, but even if we didn't have lessons and carols, I wonder how many people would be in here. So I like the idea of integration, but I just don't know if small groups is going to get enough people. So when Andy talked about at the leadership summit or the all board kickoff, or some of these ideas are like in the newsletter, you know, on this list. I was part of this brainstorming on this list, and I actually put together, I was the typist for all the feedback from the congregation. So maybe some other ideas about links to videos for that people can privately like look at. How do you not triangulate? And then the ministers could say something like, hey, we're going to work in the spring, that everybody kind of work on this on their own. We're not going to put anybody on the spot, and then provide resources for education or something like that. So I'm all for more education and skill building. I'm just not sure if small groups would reach a lot of people.
I think if the Grievance Committee were to take seriously Andy's recapitulation of what was helpful in the past and really start integrating that into the boards and committees, and even have a conversation with Andy Ingrams about it. Just because we had a mess of an early all board retreat doesn't mean we can't have a better one the next time. And there's lots of things that we could do more proactively as part of our regular practice, as opposed to turning it into an irregular practice. Do you hear the difference? And if we had that tradition, that would be good.
Say that last part again. I was making a note about the. Okay. Well, it is 12:30. I really do appreciate every one of you for showing up. I did wonder if anybody would show up, period, and give me a grievance to complain about. But this community is just so good and so powerful in so many ways. And I want to give us a blessing as we finish. I meant to give a blessing at the beginning, but to just recognize that each of us has so many opportunities to cross paths with others in this community around us, both in the church and out of the church, and that may we find ways to carry the love of whatever God we believe in and be the good human being that we would like to be to others more on our daily path for more.
Amen. What is this?